How good are you with spotting tells at the live poker table? If you're struggling with that, then listen up. One of the reasons why live poker is so profitable is that your opponents give you some incredible extra information that you can use. And no, I'm not talking about some mystical mind-reading abilities, but rather about common blunders that low-stakes players make all the time. In this video, I'm gonna spill the beans on 5 of these tells, and I will tell you, no pun intended, what they mean and how you can easily exploit them. My name is Andreas Wagner. I'm a live low-stakes professional poker player based in London, and I see these tells all the time. Especially the last one is a big favorite of mine. If you recognize that one, you'll basically have a license to print money. So let's start exploiting. The first tell is one that you will only see from truly recreational players, but it is one that can make you or save you loads of money. Here's an example. Villain raises pre-flop, which is already unusual because this type of player normally limps into a pot. The flop comes Queen 7-5 with a flush draw. He bets about a third pot, we call. The turn is an offsuit 9. He now bets again, but he bets the same amount as on the previous street, which is now about 20% pot. We call again. The river pairs the top pair, and he now bets another 5th pot. We have a snap call with our pocket 8s against this tiny bet. What would you expect him to show here? It could be a pocket pair below the queen, but it could also be ace high or some other hand that mildly connected with a board. Now let's change up the bet sizing. He still raises pre-flop, but now he bets pot on the flop. On the turn he pots it again, and on the river he now jams. What would you think is his hand in this example? I would guess it is at least a good queen. Had the board not paired, it could also have been aces or kings. So the first tell is small bet means small hand, big bet means big hand. If you identify such a player, it is as if he'd be playing with his cards face up. Call his small bets or bluff him off his mediocre hand and proceed with extreme caution against his big bets. Okay, let's move to tell number 2. This one is a proper physical tell. Recently, someone tried this one on me and it was really obvious. I opened ace-jack of spades and a really aggressive guy on the button 3-bet me. I called. The flop came 10-8 deuce, 1 spade, 2 clubs. He now bets really big. The bet size is okay in GTO terms because he should either check or bet big on this board, but it was something about him that made me think that he probably didn't have much. And it was his eyes. I looked at him and he wouldn't look away. He kept staring me down, not for 5 seconds, but for about 20 or 25 seconds. This is very unnatural. If he had aces or kings, he wouldn't need to emphasize that he has a strong hand. He would probably act weak or excited or relaxed. But when he stared me down like that, I knew almost for certain that he didn't have much. I decided to raise. He actually called. On the turn, I checked when I had a flush draw. He bet big again and stared at me once again. I called. The river brought in an offsuit king and we both checked. He turned over king-queen offsuit for a river top pair and he actually apologized and said,
I was just bluffing throughout the hand and got lucky.
Obviously, I wasn't happy that I lost the hand, but his behavior confirmed my theory. So next time someone stares you down, you can assume that they want you to fold. That said, there are some players who fake this like every other tell, but your average recreational player won't do that. Tell number 3 is a timing tell that occurs both in live poker and online. Here's an example. You raise pre-flop with ace-queen offsuit over a limper, big blind calls and also the limper calls. The flop comes 7-3 deuce rainbow, we all check. The turn is the king of hearts, bringing in a flush draw. We now decide to take a stab because the king hits our range. The big blind snap calls, the limper folds. So what do we think that the big blind has? I don't know exactly, of course, but I'm pretty sure he doesn't have a very strong hand. If he had a set, a good king, or an unlikely two pair, he would at least have considered raising it. Maybe he would still have just called, but because now there is a flush draw and there is another player to act behind him, he would have taken at least a few seconds to decide what to do with a stronger hand. So most likely he has a flush draw, and there is also a less likely chance that he has a weak king or a 7 or some middling pocket pair. So in other words, you can remove the top of his range, which means that he is capped when he calls very quickly. You can exploit this by trying to find the right bet size that he would call if you have a value hand. Or you can bet really big on the river to get him to fold his mediocre hand. Or if the flush comes in and he donk bets, then you have an easy fold. The next tell is very similar to the previous one, but this one is even more important because usually there is a lot more money at stake. Imagine you raise with pocket kings and the big blind calls. The flop comes queen 10-5 with two hearts. You c-bet and the big blind calls quickly. The turn brings the deuce of clubs, so now there are two flush draws out there. We bet again and villain calls again. The river is the 9 of clubs, bringing in the backdoor flush and the straight. So this card massively changes the board texture, so we would have to think about what we would want to do here, right? But we don't even get the chance because villain snap jams. Time to let go of our pocket kings, right? Well, normally when a recreational player puts in a lot of money on the river, then I would advocate to fold all our bluff catchers. But here the situation is a little bit different because of the timing tell. Remember, I said that we would need some time to process whether we'd want to go for value or just check back. Well, villain has a similar dilemma. The backdoor flush comes in and the straight comes in. If he has a set that he slow played, then he needs to consider whether he can go for value or not. If he had the backdoor flush draw, then he will usually also stop and think to see if all in is the best size. So what hands does he have when he snap shoves? Most likely a missed front door flush draw. It is very easy and quick to realize that the last card is not a heart. So the snap shove, when the river card changes the board texture drastically, is almost always a bluff. So this is the one time where bluff catching a big bet on the river is actually a profitable play at live low stakes. And on to exploit number 5. This is one where you can do a lot wrong if you are an inexperienced player, so pay close attention because I used to fall for this one all the time. So you raise pre-flop with a hand like ace-jack, big blind calls. The flop is pretty good for you, jack 7-4 with 2 spades. You bet around half pot, villain calls. The turn is an offsuit deuce. If you look up the definition of a break, this will be the example shown. But wait, what is villain doing? He takes a stack of 20 red chips in his hand, cuts a few out, and looks like he's ready to make a healthy bet. But just as he's about to move the chips across the line, he seems to have a change of heart. He now surprisingly checks. Sounds pretty scary, right? Well, wrong. This is almost always a desperate attempt to get to see a free or at least cheap river. He wants to convey strength to scare you. And funnily enough, this play works very often because so many players in our hero's shoes will fall for it and slow down both with their good made hands and with their bluffs. But the right play here is to go big with your bet. If you have a bluff, just blast off and you will almost always get a fold. If you have a hand like the one we have, try to find the bet size that a draw or weak pair will call. Whatever you do, don't get intimidated by this play because cutting chips and then checking means weakness. And if you want to learn more easy exploits to crush live low stakes poker, then click on the video here for my top 6 exploits.